Alright, going to jump right into it. So tip number one, there are colonies found in every major biome that will sell you goods. Some of these colonies will actually sell you rare goods that you can't normally buy anywhere else. The one in the mountains sells you the memory slot expansions for your gear so you can expand their slots. Normally you have to find these through mining or rare drops or dungeons or things like that. Or fighting Xericor, but with this colony, you can just buy them outright. There's at least one colony in every major biome that sells some type of rare gear. There's one in the forest, I'm not going to say where, you'll have to find it, but he sells the items for beacons, so you can just buy those outright. Tip number two. Certain weapon descriptions can be misleading. In the case of the Deadly Drive, it says that it's a manual aim weapon, but in reality, this weapon actually has an independent targeting feature. So the way it works is each of the 5 beams it fires will independently target enemies within their zone of fire. That zone of fire is relative to where you're aiming. It's a very large zone, however, and you have quite a bit of movement before they break off of the target and start targeting new ones. You can see here the beams will independently target different enemies and maintain on them, and you can hit up to 5 enemies or even 5 body parts at the same time. This is not the only weapon with unique functions like this, so take a look at some of the others that may not mention in their description how exactly they function. Tip number 3. Blitz will target enemies that you are looking at not whenever you immediately launch them, but once they are activated. So there's about a 1-second period between you launching the blitz and the blitz becoming active. And if you're looking at a target whenever it becomes active, it will go after that target. If you're locked onto a target, they'll go after whichever one you're locked onto. So you can independently target up to 4 enemies with your blitz on launch, and they'll maintain those targets until they're either dead or the blitz are recalled or destroyed. Now you can manually recall your blitz by calling them in with the same button used to send them out. If you don't target anything when you call them out, they'll just randomly attack any enemies within range. So you can use them as autonomous defense in that manner. Tip number 4. If you're using a weapon whose total damage output is split amongst multiple attributes, it's almost always going to be better for you to maximize the ammo of that weapon than to try and maximize one or more of those damage attributes that it has in its split. Because obviously, if you increase its total ammo capacity, every extra shot that you give it is going to send more of all of those damage types at the enemy. Even if the damage type's not all that effective, it's still going to add to the damage total. Whereas if you try to maximize damage types, all you're doing is maximizing that 1 or 2 damage types to the enemy. Now, if you're using a weapon that's highly specialized and the majority of its damage is in one specific attribute, then this may be different, especially if you're fighting an enemy that is weak to that specific attribute. In that case, it may be better to increase your damage output for that specific attribute over doing ammo if you're trying to do that sort of specialized output. But for the most part, in most cases, especially with relatively balanced weapons such as Wrath of God, you'll get significantly more out of it by maximizing its ammunition instead. Tip number 5. Whenever looking at weapons and trying to choose which one is best for you, don't just look at the basic parameter overview, because that only shows your damage, your flint, and your forward thrust, really. It doesn't show much else. There's a lot more behind these weapons that you have to look at in this screen. So this screen here, you can see where the Anfang Auger previously looked like it was pretty much just a downgrade to the Halteclair 2 other than range. Now we can see that the Anfang Auger not only has better range, but it also has higher critical damage, higher weakness exploit, and it gives you a buff to skill damage, whereas the Halteclair 2 reduces your skill damage. So depending on your playstyle and what you like to go for, the Anfang Augur may be a better option for you over the Halteclair 2. Now, if you don't really care about things like that and you just want to swing your big steel stick at enemies, then go for the Halteclair 2. But if you want to maximize your damage output against weak points, maybe trying to combine weakness points and critical hits, maybe even using skills as well mixed in, then the Anfang Augur is going to be a better option for you. So take these stats into mind whenever you're looking at weapons. Some weapons can be very misleading and very deceptively powerful because they've got middling or low stats in most aspects, but maybe they have absolutely massive critical damage or huge weak point exploit, or maybe they maximize your skill damage to a point that it actually matters to use those over something else. Different things like that are worth considering whenever looking at these weapons and comparing them. Tip number 6, the parameter screen is probably lying to you. You want to look at a detailed breakdown of your stats instead of relying on those letter grades to determine whether or not your build is actually where you want it to be. Another thing to do is to just go out and test it and largely ignore the letter grading to determine whether or not your build is where you need it to be for you. This build is specialized to have high laser defense, high physical damage output, and extremely high mobility, and it serves that purpose very, very well. If I were to try and change any parts to maximize one of the letter grades, I would interrupt its performance where it needs to be. This build is exactly how I want it to be, and it performs exactly the way it needs to. Despite that, if you were to just look at the stat screen, you would think that it has pretty poor mobility, because it's only got a C rank in its mobility rating. But the reason for that is that the thruster that is on here is not calculated in the mobility at all. I'm using an auxiliary thruster which maximizes my mobility and should put me theoretically at an A rank mobility, but it doesn't calculate that. If you're using gun arms, it won't calculate the gun arms either, so don't trust this parameter screen. Which brings me to tip number 7, which is just because a piece of gear is legendary does not mean it's better than an epic. There are going to be cases where an epic is going to be better for your build, so don't worry too much about rarities. Now, in very, very rare cases, an uncommon may be better for your build, but in most cases, epics and legendaries are going to be your main build options. Now, in this case, I'm using the Hermes 2, but I have an Atalantis 2 that is much more efficient at a very, very, very slight cost to overall mobility. So I'm going to use that one instead to give me much more sustained stamina efficiency while still giving me screaming fast mobility. So these are things that you want to consider when looking at parts for your builds. Just because it's a higher rarity does not mean it's automatically going to be better for your build, depending on the specific performance that you need. Which brings me to my final tip, which is please test your weapons. Go into the training room or go out into the field, play with them a bit, see what makes them tick. I think that it's a good idea to go into the testing room to test the general capabilities of weapons because it's more controlled and it can give you can see things that you might miss if you're just out in the field attacking regularly. One example of this is knives, which have such poor damage output that many players just assume, oh well, it's just a looting weapon. It's just for the final hit when you're trying to get your loot drops, and that's it. You put it on your stats for that, and then otherwise ignore it. It's not very good. But in actuality, the knives have the largest weak point exploit of any weapon in the game. If it's doing 30 to 35 damage to a monster on its regular hits, whenever you switch over to doing weak point damage on that same monster, it's going to go from 30 to 35 to well over 200, nearly 400 in some cases. The damage output of a knife and weak point exploit is absolutely insane. And this Corinlin that I'm using has no mods on it. That's just the raw damage of the weapon itself. I could massively increase that if I were to build the weapon out. It's such a big difference that if you weren't paying much attention to it, you like out in the field in the middle of a boss fight, you're probably not going to be paying too much attention to that. You're just going to be swinging. And who's going to try to stab a gigantic mecha dragon or a gunforce or something like that with a knife when they've got so many other options? So things like that are important to look at whenever deciding what you want in a weapon or in a build. It's actually so powerful that it matches critical Soryu, even when that Soryu is hitting weak points. And for those of you that don't know, Soryu is a special Tachi that, when put in two-handed mode and focusing on criticals, does more damage than most melee weapons can hope to match. Its critical damage output is absolutely insane. And a base Kurinman can match it or exceed it without any issues. So yeah, that's my point. Focus on testing things out and looking at the detailed stats rather than just picking whichever one has the highest damage value. I hope this video was helpful to you. I'm going to be releasing another one detailing weapon balances for basic versus laser attributes and things like that. So look forward to that. Otherwise, I hope this video was helpful. Have fun in the game, and if you have any questions, feel free to post them down in the comments. Thanks.